Are the mics working? The mics.
ერთი ორი სამი ერთი ორი სამი ერთი ორი სამი ერთი ორი სამი
აბა 1-2-1-2 კარგია? აბა კიდე? გაქვთ ხმა ყველას? 1-2-3 1-2-3.
Dear journalists, dear media representatives, colleagues, it is a great pleasure to greet you on behalf of the ENEMO observation mission and thank you for attending our press conference. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our colleagues, core team members, long-term observers and short-term observers for making this observation mission possible as well as report. ENEMO deploys 7 core team members based in Tbilisi and 8 long-term members organized into 4 multinational teams across the country stationed in Tbilisi, Gori, Kutaisi, and Zugidi. On election day, ENEMO deployed 44 multinational observer teams to monitor polling stations, preparation and openings, the voting and counting process, as well as the transfer and intake of election materials by District Election Commission. Overall, the ENEMO mission consisted of 94 observers from 13 countries. Our teams, comprising 8 LTOs and 80 STOs, observe opening procedures in 44 polling stations, voting in 482 polling stations, and closing and counting in 44 polling stations. Additionally, ENEMO monitored the intake of election materials and the tabulation of the results in 44 decks. We will now read the key message, and my colleagues later will also read the parts of their preliminary conclusions, as our report is quite extensive, 29 pages. So first we will present this conclusion, which represents something like the executive summary that would be easier for you to follow. The 2024 parliamentary elections occurred in polarized and restrictive environment, which undermine inclusivity, transparency, and fairness. Critical violations included violence against opposition members, voter intimidation, smear campaign against observers, and extensive misuse of administrative resources. Restrictive implementation of campaign regulation limited competition, placed significant pressure on civil society and the media, and effectively reduced space for criticism of the government. Even though the election administration generally conducted the process professionally and efficiently, ENEMO raises concerns about the CC independence and impartiality. The cumulative impact of observed shortcomings significantly compromised the democratic integrity of election process. On 26 October, Georgia held parliamentary election under the new least proportional system. The election occurred in a highly polarized political context, heightened by legislative controversies, particularly the adoption of the law on transparency of foreign influence in July 2024, which incited large-scale protests and backlash against the government. Reports of mistreatment and harassment of protesters combined with allegations of mass surveillance significantly impacted public trust in institutions and led to instances of self-censorship during the election. This environment, compounded by disinformation campaign and alleged misuse of administrative resources, hindered inclusivity and fairness in the electoral process. While Georgia Constitution and election code provide foundational structure for conducting elections, recent fragmented amendments raise concern over stability and consistency. Key legislative actions included banning the pre-electoral coalition, raising the electoral threshold from 1% to 5%, banning donations from legal entities, and abolishing gender quotas. These changes negatively impacted the ability of the smaller parties, emerging political entities, and female candidates to compete effectively. Additionally, amendments affecting the composition and decision-making of the Central Election Commission were adopted without broad consensus and meaningful public consultation, undermining confidence in the reform process and the election administration independency and impartiality. Now I will give the floor to my colleague Dubravka, and later other colleagues will take over.
Thank you very much, Zlatko. I will now briefly present some of our key findings related to the campaign environment as well as the media. Allegations of undue pressure on public sector employees, selective media access, and misuse of administrative resources marred the campaign. Some opposition political parties had their access to media restricted, negatively impacting voters' exposure to diverse viewpoints. Geopolitical issues dominated the election campaign, and it was framed by the ruling party as a choice between war and peace, and by the opposition political parties as a choice between Europe and Russia. ENEMO notes that disinformation narratives promoted by the ruling party, as well as foreign actors, compromised the integrity of the information space and distorted public perceptions. There have been numerous reports of abuse of public resources for organizing and intimidating voters. This included reports of confiscating citizens' IDs, reports of use of social services to pressure socially vulnerable groups, as well as extensive reports of the use of the education sector to ensure that its employees attend ruling party events and vote for the ruling party. ENEMO raises strong concerns about the impact of these practices on preserving trust in elections and the legitimacy of election results. The media scene is highly polarized. Access to free airtime and access to paid political advertisement were only partially respected. The media did not have a legal route to obtain clarifications on whether party ads violated prohibitions on hate speech, inciting violence, and interethnic hatred. The Anti-Corruption Bureau interpreted the definition of a subject with a declared electoral goal too widely when applying it to non-governmental organizations and related individuals. Similarly, Comcom's interpretation that political entities whose leaders announced they would join other electoral lists granted qualified political parties ineligible to free airtime. ENEMO deems that these actions of the two regulatory bodies negatively impacted the freedom of expression and the ability of opposition political parties to run election campaigns, thereby reducing space for criticism of the government effectively. Thank you, and I will now give the floor to my colleague Christina, who is our Deputy Head of Mission.
Thank you, Dubravka. I will talk a little bit about election administration, voters list, registration of candidates, women, minorities, and the assessment of the election day. ENEMO assesses that the election administration, including the CEC, DECs, and PECs, operated in a professional and efficient manner, but with notable transparency shortcomings. The last-minute CEC decision setting the date for the distribution of functions between PEC members was not publicly communicated, limiting observer access. Opposition-nominated CEC members cited unequal treatment and difficulties in accessing information. New election technologies, including voter identification devices and optical ballot scanners, were introduced in 75% of precincts, covering approximately 90% of voters. ENEMO interlocutors did not express any major concerns regarding the accuracy and inclusiveness of the voters' list. Voters had several ways to verify their correct inclusion and request corrections. The preliminary voter list was published at the PEC level for public scrutiny. The current electoral system does not permit candidates to stand independently, which is in contradiction with international obligations and standards for democratic elections. A total of 18 electoral subjects were registered by the CEC, providing voters with a wide range of political alternatives. However, candidates were not allowed to run on another party's list without formally changing or suspending their party membership beforehand. ENEMO notes that while the party and candidate registration process was transparent and inclusive, this last regulation hinders freedom of association. Women's political representation in Georgia remains starkly unequal, with political participation heavily male-dominated at both national and local levels. ENEMO assesses the removal of gender quotas as a significant regression, risking the entrenchment of gender disparities. Minority group representation and engagement in the electoral process was limited, with overall insufficient legislative and administrative efforts to encourage minority inclusivity in candidates' list and voter outreach. Ahead of Georgia's 2024 parliamentary elections, domestic observers face significant challenges with an increasingly restricted civil society space. Mounting pressure from government actions, such as legal obstacles and intensified scrutiny under the law on transparency of foreign influence, limited their ability to operate, raising concerns about the transparency of the electoral process. Direct interference, such as temporarily suspending Transparency International Georgia's observation activities, exemplified the strained relationship between civil society and the ruling party, exacerbating the tense political climate. Some international organizations also became targets of smear campaigns by ruling party leaders and affiliated media, further complicating the observation environment and detracting from impartial oversight. Such pressures on domestic and international observers highlight a restrictive climate for effective monitoring, challenging efforts to ensure a fair and transparent electoral process. Election day in Georgia saw numerous serious issues affecting the integrity of the process. ENEMO observers reported multiple acts of violence and intimidation, including assaults on opposition figures, supporters, and journalists, particularly in Marneuli, Tbilisi, and Kakheti, allegedly by Georgian Dream affiliates. The tense atmosphere around polling stations included voter intimidation, unauthorized individuals, and organized transportation, with Georgian Dream agitators repeatedly influencing voters. Additionally, the installation of cameras in polling stations by Georgian Dream representatives raised concern about voter privacy. While procedures were generally followed, these cumulative issues significantly compromised the fairness of election day. ENEMO reported that polling station opening procedures were affected by minor issues, including delays in nearly a third of locations due to technical malfunctions and disorganization. In 28.6% of observed polling stations, voters required assistance with PCOS devices. ENEMO negatively assessed the overall conduct of 4.8 polling stations, with voter privacy violations remaining a key concern. All observed polling stations closed on time, with 81.8% using counting technologies. Unauthorized individuals were present in 4.5% of observed polling stations, but pre-counting procedures were followed and no queues were reported at closing. Minor procedural issues affected 80.2% of observed stations, and technical problems occurred in 11.4% during protocol transmission. Overall, ENEMO positively assesses closing and counting in 95.4% of polling stations, noting only 4.6% as poorly organized. During the transfer of materials to DEX, 9% of DEC premises were inadequate and 11.4% were overcrowded, leading to a 4.6 negative rating of DEC operations. Now I give floor back to Zlatko, head of the mission.
I will add more comments and assessment related to appeals and complaints and appeal procedure. By October 26, a total number of 216 complaints had been submitted to election management bodies, primarily concerning the PEC operations 78, misuse of administrative resources 28, and campaigning violations 75. Of these, 40 complaints remain pending, while only 17 were satisfied, with the rest dismissed or rejected. Additionally, approximately 35 election-related cases have been adjudicated in court, addressing issues such as recognizing subject with declared electoral goals, free airtime allocation, voting abroad, and right of broadcasters to recognize party as qualified electoral subjects. ENEMO notes a tendency among the courts to apply broad interpretation when upholding restrictions, while adopting narrow and rigid approaches when the expansion of protections of the rights is concerned. Procedural requirements and short deadlines, particularly a 2-day limit for appeals and decision, potentially restrict the development of comprehensive cases, especially for complex disputes. Election-related complaints and decisions were generally accessible through an online registry allowing transparency, and election commission and courts largely adhered to prescribed deadlines supporting timely resource. So this is about our statement, and now floor is open for your question. Just to remind you that there are 2 reports that are right now published on our web page. One is the interim report covering the period until the preliminary state recovered. So please take a look on both reports, because in that way you will get the comprehensive picture of what we assessed during this process here in Georgia. Now, floor is yours. We need a mic here. Or there. There we go.
No?
Yeah.
Deborah Wild, freelance journalist, German. Given the problems and issues that you outlined in your presentation, would you call these elections free and fair?
So, the question that I would say that we expected, of course, this is one of the key questions for observation. I think if you pay attention on our key message, we used one sentence that is very precise, and I will say, the cumulative impact of observed shortcomings significantly compromise the democratic integrity of election process. So it's very precise, it's very strong, but it's not final. Why it's not final? Because the process is not over. We are waiting the end of the complaints and appeal procedures, and we are also waiting we saw, but just before this press conference, that there was the audit report on the verification of the results that were prepared using the electronic counting machines. So we need to assess all those processes in order to make the final assessment that is going to be presented in our final report with this regular procedure. But these elections were not good, and they were conducted good. They were not conducted in the proper way, as it should be expected from the country that has a candidate EU member status. So this is something that should be discussed later on. Please, we have.
თქვენ ისაუბრეთ კონკრეტული დარღვევების შესახებ, ამ მომენტისთვის შეგიძლიათ თუ არა კონკრეტული რაიმე მტკიცებულებები წარმოადგინოთ ამ მიმართულებით და მეორე კითხვა მექნება ენდობით თუ არა CESCO-ს მიერ ამ მომენტში გამოქვეყნებულ შედეგებს.
As I already mentioned in my introductory speech, I presented the figures about the size of the mission and that our observers were reporting and filling the different forms that are now in our database. So actually we, in the case when there is some kind of the incident, they fill the incident so we have their observation report. As all of us seen during the E-Day, there was a lot of the violation of the procedure, there was a lot of the violence, that should not happen during the E-Day. So we are assessing all those aspects, and we are going, and actually this report is very critical because we are not satisfied what we've seen during the pre-electoral period, but also during the E-Day. When you are talking about your question regarding the results, ENEMO, as International Observation Mission, is not conducting parallel tabulation. So we exactly do not have any evidence to say these results are okay or not. But it is very important for stability in one country that results are accepted by all contestants. And we are seeing that actually they are not. So this is some challenge for everyone in Georgia and we will see the other domestic observers conducted parallel vote verification process, counting. So we'll see what they say, but also there would be additional, I assume, the additional auditing of comparing those results that are provided through electronic counting machines and those that were provided using the hand counting. But at this moment, it is now not our task. We never do that, so I cannot give you an answer on the last question.
Yes, hello. I have a question from Swedish television SVT. So in the report regarding the CEC, it says that there are questions regarding the Commission's independence and impartiality. Could you please just develop that a little bit? Thank you.
So actually, you can see in our report, which is wider, there is a quite big section regarding the performance of electoral administration. You know that during the before the election there was electoral legal changes that actually jeopardized the independent position of the Central Election Commission and increased the influence and the power of the ruling party in appointing the persons in the commission. So there is quite strong influence of the ruling party on the work of the CC. But we have to say also that this Central Election Commission was very transparent, not in one part, and it is reported in our report. In decision-making process, sometimes they were not transparent. But when we are talking about transparency of the counting results, counting reports from the polling station, that was done really in the transparent way, so everyone could follow that and check on the spot, is it true or not. So there are some things that are good, but you know, there is so many actions of the ruling majority before the election that were actually shrinking the space for independent institutions, but for opposition leaders and NGOs to act properly as it is expected from these institutions.
მოგესალმებით. საინტერესოა კონკრეტულად გუშინ არჩევნების დღეს იყო თუ არა დაფიქსირებული საერთაშორისო დამკვირვებლების მხრიდან ისეთი დარღვევები, ისეთი მასშტაბური დარღვევები, რასაც შეეძლო გავლენა მოეხდინა უშუალოდ არჩევნების შედეგზე.
It's very difficult to say what is significant because we are not assessing the results and the effects on so my colleague Christina, deputy head of the mission, presented very clear assessment of our observers of work of the polling station boards, PECs, and also precise assessment scores for each of the procedure that they conduct in the polling station. So you will see around 5% were negative assessment of the work of the PECs. But at this moment, we cannot assess at what extent this process was compromised, you know, and what is the impact of those irregularities. One more, please.
Hello. The notion these days, going down the line, is that elections these days are not falsified on election day anymore. They're by the time election day rolls around, the job is done. Given again what you outlined in the pre-election period, and you yourself said the space has become considerably smaller for actors on election day to move to do the right thing. Would you think that the pre-election campaign provided for again free and fair choice?
Thank you very much for that question. I think our report is broadly in line with what you said. It was actually the pre-election period that actually determined the quality of the electoral process as a whole, more so than the election day itself. As noted in the findings, we do consider that events that have taken place around spreading of disinformation, specifically in relation to credibility of election observation, as well as the secrecy of vote, which was a narrative that was widespread and significantly influencing citizens' perception as they entered the polling stations on the E-Day, had a significant impact. Separately, reports of abuse of administrative resources equally we assess to have had the impact. And finally, the actions of regulatory bodies and the overall intimidating climate which was reinforced by these actions of regulatory bodies that constrained opposition political parties and NGOs for a period of time definitely negatively influenced the climate in which citizens went into the election process. However, we were not able to assess the impact that has had on their voting preference at this point. Thank you.
Any more question? No. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming.